All right, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Jay Davis Show. Super excited to have Brendan Kane today as our guest. Welcome, Brendan.
Thanks for having me, Jay. It's a pleasure to connect with you and everybody that's tuning in for this.
Well, you and I have talked before, but can you give our listeners just a bit of history on what you do and your background?
Yeah, basically, I've been in social media since 2005. So basically, my career has been spent reverse engineering virality across these platforms. Doing it, started in the film industry, then started working with major entertainers and celebrities, then influencers, creators, and brands. So that's the better part of how I've spent the course of my career.
Yeah, I love it. I want to ask a ton of things about virality because it's an interest we both share. Um, what is, maybe something you've been working on lately? Tell us a little bit more about Hook Point, some of your books. Give people a little bit of background there.
Yeah, so I have two books. The first one is called 1 Million Followers: How I Built a Massive Social Audience in 30 Days. And basically was a case study of using all the methodologies that I learned over the years to generate 1 million followers in 30 days and breaking down those methodologies, but then also uh, really wanted to provide a broader perspective on social. So I went off and interviewed partners and friends and other leading experts on their kind of growth tactics that they have used to drive remarkable results. So, within that book, probably collectively represents hundreds of billions of views and hundreds of millions of followers collectively across uh, all of us. And then the second book is Hook Point: How to Stand Out in a 3 Second World, which dives a bit deeper in how you contextualize your message to stand out in the very noisy world that we find ourselves in. And it pertains to both online and offline conversations. And Hook Point really specializes in uh, understanding what it takes to break through with your content, with your message. So we have a creative process that's called viral content engineering. That's backed by 60 billion views, 100 million followers, and a billion in revenue, purely through organic content. And the core crux of that process and why it's successful is it's deeply rooted in research. So basically, we have a team of analysts that are constantly mining publicly available data on social media and understanding the qualitative nuances around specific content formats and why they go viral, but also when those formats don't go viral. So I'll kind of break that down a little bit more
Yeah.
simply. So when I talk about a format, I started in the film industry, so I'm sure everybody tuning into this has seen a movie. Well, every single movie follows the same 3 act structure in terms of how they tell their stories. So that same 3 act structure is used for horror movies, comedy movies, sci-fi, drama. It doesn't matter the genre, it uses the same 3 act structure. Now, the interesting thing is an Academy Award winning movie uses that same 3 act structure, but an absolute disaster fire, the worst movie you've ever seen, still uses that 3 act structure. So what's the difference? Well, it's these qualitative elements. It's the directing, it's the acting, it's the dialogue, it's the cinematography. All of these elements contribute to your successful use or lack thereof of that 3 act structure. So social media has hundreds of formats, thousands of formats that people use on these platforms. So what we do is we analyze the use of these kind of 3 act structures, so to speak, these formats on these platforms. And when we do that, and I'll give you an example. I'm sure most people have seen it. A format we call two characters, one light bulb. And what it is it's the same person having a conversation with themselves. So they play the expert and the novice, and they go back and forth and have this conversation. Now, that format is used by lawyers, by nutritionists, fitness experts, real estate agents. It's used by a variety of different content creators and brands. Again, the same way a 3 act structure can be used for different types of genres. these storytelling formats can be used for different industries, niches, expertises. Now, the interesting thing with that format, the people that are having the most success with that format can yield up to 10 million views on a single video. Yet other people can use that exact same format and generate less than 10,000 views on a video. So, what we're doing in our research process is we're looking at the difference between somebody generating 10 million views and somebody generating 10,000 views. And again, we're paying attention to this qualitative nuances. So we have over 50 different performance drivers that we look at. So these performance drivers are like pacing, tonality, number of edits, first 3 seconds, facial expressions, body cues, environment, backgrounds, all of these different things to determine, well, what are the real drivers that cause somebody to use that specific format successfully? And also, what are the drivers that detract from that performance with that specific format? So that's why I use the analogy of kind of film because the same principles apply. We're just looking at different types of formats across these platforms.
Dude, that's so interesting. There's so many nuances to things that people probably see every day and just don't even think about. Just like a movie,
Yeah,
I
and you
think.
have to.
Yeah, yeah.
Because when I started in social media, there's maybe a few million people on the platforms. So it's far easier. Like you could just put content out there and a lot of people would see it. Versus today, there's 4 billion people on social media pushing upwards of 200 billion messages into the world every day. There is an ultimate fight for attention. And these nuances really matter. Like um, the biggest contributing factor to success or lack thereof on social media is the algorithms. And there's a lot of myths about the algorithms. Like one of the myths is that they suppress your reach on purpose in order to get you to pay for reach. That's not the case because then nobody would ever go viral purely organically. The algorithms really only care about one thing, and that's retention, meaning the longer people spend on these platforms, the more ads they can serve, the more profit they generate. So, what they're looking for is content that they can see to millions of people and hold that attention for as long as possible. It's not about frequency or hashtags or how many times a day you post. It's really about the substance, your ability to grab the attention and then hold that attention as long as possible. And just to kind of give you an example, one of my friends, Alex Stemp, he's just surpassed 20 million followers on TikTok. He's an amazing content creator. And a lot of people have probably seen his content. He's a photographer and he approaches random strangers on the street and offers them professional photo shoots. The interesting thing is, we did an analysis of his content, and his most viewed video had 100 million views. And we analyzed the retention graph, the average length of time people spent watching that video, which was 27 seconds. But then we analyzed another video of his that was 5 million views, and the average retention graph, or the average time somebody watched that was 21 seconds. So we're talking about a 6-second differential represented 95 million views in performance. That's the level of granularity that we're dealing with because there's so much content being produced and put out into the world every single day.
I think that's where TikTok is such an interesting microcosm right now. Because you have someone like Alex who I feel like has kind of innovated and come up with this idea. And then you have just tons of people who are now copying him, who are doing similar things like let me Photoshop a picture of you. Let me, whatever. Do you think that's leading to us to a place where meritocracy is king or where there's no protection of ideas? What's kind of your thoughts?
Well, I kind of look at it as, again, going back to film, is everybody uses the same 3 act structure, but people don't say, oh, Steven Spielberg stole that 3 act structure from his predecessors. It's the same thing here is understanding what Alex does as a storytelling structure, you can easily make that your own. You can also easily just copy it, completely. Now, I will say there's a lot of people that try and copy Alex and don't have success. There are some that do and have some success. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely a fine line of you don't want to, again, in the case of a movie, if you make a horror film, is you just completely rip off The Shining and, do your own version of it. You want to kind of put your own spin on it. But I think understanding the structure, and we call that format man on the street. And man on the street is used in many different ways, and each of the ways that we dissect are distinctly unique. So, yes, there's a fine line where you don't want to just be ripping people off, but learning the elements, those qualitative nuances of what makes him successful with that format, I think is extremely helpful to understand how to become a good storyteller, and is not, necessarily there's a way to do it where you're not just like kind of ripping him off, so to speak.
Yeah. No, I think that's such an interesting and such a great point. That it's, hey, there's always, I mean, if you've seen, like, most people have probably watched everything as a remix. There's so much mixing and remixing going on constantly. And so you look at TikTok and, like, that man on the street concept, there's tons of people who have taken that concept, but then kind of made it their own and then found success there. Like, I think you look at Alex and then you also look at Jimmy Darts. I wouldn't say either of those are copying each other, but it's a very similar format, but they both took their own way and kind of leveraged their personality and what they're best at. And it's a very unique version. They're both finding amazing success in their own way. I think, Mr. Beast has shown that there's a lot of ways to innovate on things that have already been done, the giving away that a lot of that giving, I think, was really kind of, I first kind of saw from David Dobrik, but I think Mr. Beast took that to like another level and really innovated there. So yeah, it's very interesting to kind of see that. Where do you feel like that takes us as you look at all of this data, as you have access to all of this data? What are the things you're kind of gathering, and where do you think that leads us to next?
Well, I think there's going to be more and more saturation of the market as more and more people get on social media, because it's still growing. I think where it leads us is, how effective of a storyteller are you? I mean, that's going to determine whether you rise to the top or fall to the bottom. And it's so fascinating because, we work with a lot of brands and companies, and we still run into a lot of resistance from the fact that people are so operating off this old paradigm. I want to create a niche message for a niche audience. And that just doesn't work as it pertains to organic. And it's becoming even more challenging as it becomes to paid, because targeting is, been hurt significantly with iOS updates and restrictions and privacy restrictions and things like that. And, the people, the brands and the creators that have the most success, and this applies to film too, is how can you make the average person care? Somebody that knows nothing about you or may have no interest in your subject matter. How can you make them interested? Like, um, Mark Rober, an engineer from NASA. He's making engineering interesting with his own spin. Veritasium, 13 million subscribers, has turned science into an interesting thing. That's where I think it keeps going, is how effective are you at making somebody that has no idea who you are or may not have any interest in your subject matter care. I think that that's where it continues to go, is just building and becoming, because it is still a new medium, in terms of telling stories through these platforms. And I think that it's just going to get more nuanced in the same way that film did. Film started, with no sound, and then it went to music, and then it went to dialogue, and then, to color, and then to visual effects, and all of these elements kept elevating the level of storytelling and what was possible. And I think that the same applies with social media.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. So when you have someone come to you and they're a brand, they're an entrepreneur, and they're saying, "I'm trying to develop kind of my storytelling, or I'm trying to even know what should I do." I think that's something we hear. I think of that as an entrepreneur myself. Like, how do we not just be totally salesy on one side and just constantly pitching our product, but then at the same time have a voice? Like, what are some of the things that you would recommend? Someone saying, "Hey, I have this product or group of products that are selling well. I need to do better at my organic social media." what are some of the kind of top recommendations you would say?
I mean, the place that we always start is research, is go out there, study, first understand the platform that you want to be successful on and study the very specific formats that are doing well in those formats, but don't just pay attention to people that are using that format successfully. Look at the people that are using that format unsuccessfully. Because a big, a f- now I can talk about a few big mistakes that people make. Is one big mistake is people get caught up in these trends, or they see somebody like Alex and they're like, oh, I'm going to do that format. And either even if they have success, a lot of people don't, they just jump to another trend and they say, "Oh, I see this other person doing this other thing." And they keep jumping around to all of these different formats and they don't even look at the world in a format. They almost kind of think of it as a trend and think they need to be constantly evolving and changing the and jumping. And if you look at Mr. Beast, Mark Rober, Alex Stepp, they've been using the same format for years. They just become a master of it. Just think about it. If like Steven Spielberg, every time he made a movie, he created a new script structure and didn't stick to the 3-act structure, he wouldn't be world class at what he does. So I think that the first place is really do the research, identify a format that you feel um, connects with the way that you want to tell stories, understand what is the difference between people using it successfully and unsuccessfully to inform the way that you go about executing. And when it's not successful, don't give up on it. What I would recommend is take that reference, put it on one side of the screen, put yours on the other side of the screen, and play it side by side and see what was the difference. And I'm not talking about the subject matter, I'm talking about the way you're telling those stories, the pacing, the tonality, the edits, the music, the background, and be really honest with yourself. So I think that that's a first place to start. Another big mistake that people do is they get so focused on their own internal data, they'll use like a Hootsuite or Sprout Social. They get so caught up in their own metrics. And you need to look at the larger ecosystem of what's going on. Because if you're looking at your own metrics and you're averaging like 10,000 views a video, how are your own metrics going to tell you how to break through to get a million views a video? They're not. And even if you do get it to a million views a video, do you really understand what drove that performance? So again, a big thing is to really start out, um, study the landscape, identify a format, really dive into those qualified nuances that make that format tick, and stick with it until you become world class at it.
I love that. I think that's sticking to first principles rather than like jumping from thing to thing to thing to thing. And I think that's what most businesses that I see is it's like a sound has become really popular or a certain formats become popular and they're like, let's just do that. And so even some of our own businesses, I see that kind of almost seems like multiple personality disorder in an organic page of like jumping from thing to thing to thing. And like you said, yeah, Mark Rover's been doing those videos for how long? And they're I mean, he's still in that kind of same structure of I'm making a scientific kind of hypothesis, and then I'm going to use the scientific method to prove it. But it's just very entertaining, and like you said, he's become a master of it. Same with all those guys and girls who are just killing it. So I love that. I think that's such great
And
feedback
people
for
people
a
people
brand.
think that choosing a format and sticking with it limits creativity, but it doesn't. Like you look at Mr. Beast or Mark Rober or Alex Stemp, there's so many different stories. And again, going back to film, is that same 3-act structure is been used to make so many different amazing movies that feel completely different. Because when you're watching a movie, unless you've been trained in script writing and things, you're not saying, "Oh, that's the inciting incident. That's plot point 1, that's plot point 2, plot point 3." And even if it is, it's the storyteller's probably not doing a great job. So you don't even know. Most people, 99% of people, when they sit down in front of a movie, they don't know that it's the same structure that's being used over and over again. Yet these stories feel so unique and different, and engaging.
That's such great advice. Well, um, one of the things I usually ask and would love to kind of hear your perspective. Uh, when you, well, one of the things I want to ask you first, how, when you were, I mean, 2005 is completely different worlds. Uh, I don't think people were now people are jumping into social media because it's like, well, there's so much money to be made. This has now been proven. That was not the case in '05. I mean, '05, it was like, I even feel like 2015, people were still kind of like poo pooing social media. Why are you spending money there? It'll never overtake TV. It'll never overtake the traditional channels. What sparked you in '05 to be like, I'm in, I want to do this and make this amazing career out of it? What was the thing that drove you?
Well, I was working for a movie studio at a time, and I realized that every time we finished a film, and keep this in mind, a single piece of content is a film that we would invest tens of millions of dollars, if not more, in. So there would be a sense of anxiety and stress over the studio office when we finished a film, because now we need hundreds of millions of people around the world to know about this single piece of content in months. We didn't have years or decades to build a brand. Now you can look at Marvel and Star Wars, that's different. But most movies aren't like that. Um, and I just kind of looked at social and just digital in general, and I just saw, I did the first influencer campaign on YouTube. This was like 2006, 2007, and my philosophy was there's these creators, they weren't even called influencers at the time, that are reaching millions of people and they're so engaged. Why don't I just reach out to them and say, "Do you want to interview a movie star?" Because nobody was doing it, and I just saw the opportunity that, like, these people have this audience, why don't we tap into it? So I saw it really as kind of like a means to an ends of, like, achieving this goal at a much more cost efficient rate and sometimes free compared to what we were paying on television, print, and radio. Now, when I first started in social, did I have any inclination of what it would be today? No. I just thought it was really cool and interesting and effective way to reach a lot of people around the world in a short period of time. And I just did it more and more and more. And because there was no like experts at the time, because it was such a new medium, I became kind of that conduit between social media and the movie studios, and then directors, producers, and actors. And then it started extending to technology I would build on top of it and things of that nature. So it just kind of interested me, and I wanted to figure out what it was and how it worked. Um, and then I just kept going with it because it just kept evolving and there was new opportunities and things of that nature.
I love that. I think that I always feel like, when you jump into a lot of things, it's not going to make sense to outside people because they don't see that opportunity there. Uh, but it's a commonality I see among entrepreneurs and innovators. Is they're like, here's this new thing, and I just want to learn about it and understand it and test it and see how it can be used. And that just seems to be a common theme among that group of people. They're willing to go and try something that might end up being a total waste of time, or it might totally change their careers.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, one of the questions I always ask people, if you're giving one piece of advice, or if there's one lesson you've learned that when you're looking back 20, 25 years, you would have never guessed you would have learned a totally kind of unintuitive lesson, what would that one of those lessons be?
I think patience is the biggest one, which is still challenging for me today, but especially early on, you want things to happen so fast, and you just like you said, you've got to make mistakes. You've got to try things that don't work to get to the answers that do. And I see that as a reoccurring theme, especially with clients that we work with, is they expect things to happen right away. When there's nuance to really understanding how to be effective on these platforms, and I think it applies to any aspect in life. It's just you don't really win the lottery tomorrow as you put in all of this groundwork and really perfect this level of expertise. Um, and I think that that's a big thing that I have learned over the years and try and get better at, and just also a big thing that I think holds people back from success in the work that we do. It's just purely a mindset thing. So you look at Mr. Beast, he just kind of kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And he was relentless about it. And didn't give up. He was not having that level of success in the beginning that he has today, for sure.
That's it's such an interesting uh part of the process. I think it's something that um a lot of times people forget. It's amazing when you see those people who've been doing something for 30, 40, 50 years, even 20 years and become a master of their craft. So
Yeah, I think people always see the success, but they don't see the journey that it took to get that level of success.
that's awesome. Great advice. I love it. Well, time just flew as it always does. What would you ask listeners? Is there a call to action, something you would ask them to go do? I would personally say definitely go buy your books. We use them a lot at our agency, but also around the office at the different brands we own. Uh, Amazing content, amazing advice. But what would you ask people to kind of go and do?
Yeah, if they want to learn more about our process, they can go to hookpoint.com. They can connect with our team. Our books are sold on Amazon, Audible, pretty much any place books are sold. And I do check my messages on LinkedIn and Instagram as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us, and so great to learn from you.
No, thanks for having me. It was a true pleasure to connect with you and everybody that tuned in today.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandon.